Hi, I'm Firelight. I am the host of the podcast Inciting a Riot and the author of the new book, The Dabbler's Guide to Witchcraft. Welcome back to my channel. I recently did an interview with the great and mighty Thorn Mooney, in which I told a story that I got wrong. And I thought I would actually come back and retell the story because it's important. I think it teaches us an important concept about traditions and about the power of traditions and the hold that they have over us as a community, as witches, as spiritual practitioners. So there once was a spiritual master, and the spiritual master had a cat. Now, the spiritual master had great renown, and people came from all over to learn from this particular spiritual master. And the master led ritual every day at noon, every day. But after a while, the spiritual master realized that the cat did what cats do and would jump in people's laps and kind of get in people's way and stuff. So to help combat that, the spiritual master tied up the cat outside, long leash, very comfortable, nice and fine, but couldn't get into the temple where the master and all of the master students were meditating and doing ritual and practicing. Speaking of cats. Now, I probably should have tied up mine before I did this video. Everybody say hi to Bella. Everybody say bye to Bella. So anyways, the spiritual master came up with a plan to tie the cat up outside and did so every day right before the master and the master students did ritual, tied the cat up outside every day. Time came, time went, students came, students went. The cat was always tied up right before ritual. Well, after a while, enough students passed through that all they ever knew was that the cat was always tied up right before ritual happened. Eventually, the cat died, and the master was very sad. The master grieved the loss of his beloved friend. But then the next day, right before it's time for ritual, the students are in a tizzy. They're freaking out. Master, we can't have ritual. The master looks around and says, why? Why can we not have ritual? And the students say, there is no cat. I first heard this story when I was taking a comparative religious philosophy course a million years ago in college. And the lesson of the story is that traditions come into being from a lot of sources. Sometimes it's UPG, sometimes it's a bothersome cat. And when you are presented with new information, especially new information in a spiritual context, right? You're reading a book on Correspondences. I recently did an interview with Brina Guerin of the Hex Positive podcast. Great podcast, highly recommend it. In which she said that I think her first book was the Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs by Scott Cunningham, which is a great book. And I own the book. No tea, no shade, no pink lemonade. It was one of my first books and I love it. And it's great. It's fun. It does all of the things that you want an encyclopedia on herbs to do. It looks pretty. It looks fun. And I go into this in my book, The Dabbler's Guide to Witchcraft, in which I talk about correspondences and traditions and sort of the way things have been done. Because sometimes you go through and you read a book and you read through and you think, okay, so let's talk about correspondences. Correspondences are a really easy one to sort of parse out here, right? Because you might be reading along and think, let's take amethyst. Amethyst is good for sleep, it aids in positive dreams, and also helps with alcoholism. What? What, you might say? This purple rock is gonna fix my drunkenness? Why is that? Oftentimes, the book doesn't typically tell you where that came from, especially in a book on correspondences. It just tells you that it is. There's an example that I give in my book of one of these situations, the Crystal Lepidolite. Lepidolite, whenever you look it up, typically is said to be a calming stone. It helps with anxiety. Some books, we go into this in the book, some books give some pretty medicalized advice about lepidolite, in which they tell you that it will do all sorts of things for your GI tract. You should drink it in a tincture. It aids in the stabilizing of tectonic plates and a bunch of other stuff. That I don't understand. But the thing about lepidolite is that the reason why it's associated with things like calming your anxiety and alleviating feelings of depression is because it's one of the world's most abundant sources of lithium. So one of the world's most abundant mineral sources of lithium. Lithium is used as an antidepressant and has been since it was discovered in the late 1800s. And most of the books on witchcraft and correspondences and stuff like that, especially when it comes to crystals, don't talk about that. And if they do mention that it has lithium in it, they don't tell you why that's important. The link between the observable phenomenon, the link between the sort of scientific or historical use, the reason why the correspondence exists, and what you're reading in your witchy book is severed, right? Lepidolite contains lithium. Lithium is good for depression and is still prescribed as such. And the entry that you see in the book of lepidolite is good for, good for calming. It's good for all of these other things. It is severed. That's not mentioned in the book. I bring this up because there's a lot of traditions, a lot of correspondences, a lot of information that sort of flows around the ether, right? There's information, there's discourse about holidays. Mabon is happening right now here in the Northern Hemisphere, and there's a lot of discourse about Mabon and whether it's a real holiday and whether it was ever called Mabon and yada, yada, yada. I will leave that conversation to the experts, of which I am not one on that particular holiday. Go listen to a video by Mara Starling if you'd like more about that. But what I will say is that it's interesting how so much information gets passed through books, gets passed through our, witchy books, witchy sort of canon of lore, that we just kind of take in without questioning. But I understand why we do it, right? Because we thought we did our research. We thought we were doing the research. We said, okay, I watched The Craft, I watched Practical Magic, I watched Charmed, I watched whatever, I read a book. Something, somewhere, something sparked an interest in magic in me, right? And I became interested in it and I wanted to learn more. So I thought that I was doing right by going and listening to a podcast or going and watching a YouTube or going and buying a book. Books, as we keep talking about in these videos and on my podcast, books tend to confer a level of authority that is sometimes unearned, but I digress. We thought we were doing our due diligence. We thought we were doing our good research by going and reading a book, by going and, listening to an expert. But the problem is that a lot of the information that you read is just sort of rehashed from other witchy books. I came up in a time, late 90s, early 2000s, in which most of the bibliographies, most of the extended reading, the further reading at the back of the book was kind of all the same books. And if you read one book, you read 10 books, you read 20 books, it was kind of all the same information rehashed over and over again from sort of the same cobbled together resources from the, late 20th century. And the problem with that is that there wasn't a lot of why behind the what. Why does this correspondence exist? Why do we practice this? Why do we say that this holiday is called this? Why do we eat these foods at this time? There's just sort of, this is what we do. This is how we operate. This is what this crystal does. This is what this herb does. This is what you should do. And the problem with that, let me go back to my example of lepidolite. The problem with severing the reason from the correspondence, the reason from the lore, is that it can lead to harm in some situations. If you don't tell people that lepidolite has lithium in it, and you're telling them to make a tincture, a crystal tincture, and a lot of books tell you that you can. In fact, some of the biggest crystal books out there, especially one of the biggest, specifically says that it's great in a tincture to aid in digestion. The problem with that is that lepidolite isn't just a single mineral. It's not just a single element. It has multiple minerals inside of it. There's cesium and rubidium that are also inside of lepidolite. And those go boom whenever they hit water. Now, to break down lepidolite and get lithium and cesium and rubidium out of it, you have to crush it, and there's a whole process to it. So if I go and I get my chunk of, polished lepidolite from a crystal shop and I stick it in a glass of water, is it going to explode? Probably not, but the chances are not zero. The chances are not zero of that happening. And not only that, there's still the possibility that you could be drinking toxic rock juice. I mean, you shouldn't be drinking lithium juice if you're not being told to do so by a medical practitioner. Beyond that, there was that interesting malachite phallus of 2020 that came out, right? You all might remember that on Tumblr, somebody posted a photo of a malachite stalactite, and it kind of looked, like a penis. And so the internet does what the internet did what the internet does, and was like, could you put the malachite phallus inside of you? And some people, even I think the BuzzFeed science editor was like, I mean, just polish it off, just make sure it's kind of like free of debris. Sure, stick it up in there. And for a little while, the internet was like, hey, I can put the malachite phallus inside of me. And the problem with that is that then a food science expert came along and was like, no. You can't just stick things inside of you because it's important to have intersectional science. We have to have an intersectional understanding of what is happening here. It's not just that the malachite is free of debris. It's also what the malachite has in it and what your body chemistry does, especially people that have vaginas. If you're sticking a piece of malachite up there, malachite is very high in copper and can really harm people, can clean out all of the good bacteria and stuff from a person's vagina, if they have one. It's not great. It's also soluble in water, and a lot of lubricants that you buy in stores and a lot of the natural lubrication of the human body is water-based, and that can break down that malachite, exposing you to copper, which is not great. It's not great. All of that being said, beyond stuff that's like natural science, beyond stuff that's like crystals and plants and what we should and shouldn't be putting into our bodies, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of traditions out there. There's a lot of just stuff that you might be reading in books. And the thing is, you thought you were doing your good research, right? By going and reading the book, by going and watching the podcast, or watching the YouTube video, listening to the podcast, right? But the thing is, you still have a duty to yourself to make sure that the information that you're filtering in, that you're taking in, is good information. Still make sure that you double and triple check what you read, because so much of the stuff that is written inside of our community and aimed at us, tends to sort of brush up against things like medicalizing claims or presenting a version of history that hasn't necessarily been fact-checked. And before I get all of the hate comments of like, no, if it's in a book, it's been fact-checked. If it was, all of the Margaret Murrayite theories of the burning times wouldn't have stayed in books for several decades. I still see them filtered around. So no, we if things are being fact checked, they're just being lightly fact checked. So, and the thing is, it's not shade on the pagan publishing industry. This is a problem. Fact checking is a problem industry wide in all of nonfiction. I've talked about this on some of my other platforms before, but it bears repeating. So much of what you read in nonfiction has not been fact checked. The publisher, by and large, thinks that the author has done their own fact checking. They might give it a fact check for spelling or dates or something like that, but by and large, so much of the information in there hasn't been fact checked. I did ask, just so that we all, just on the up and up, I did ask my publisher to thoroughly fact check my book. In fact, some of the stuff, the spells in the back of the book, were run by a science editor. Is it still possible that some stuff's wrong? Yeah, I'm sure there is. I'm a fallible human being, and so are all of the human beings that that edited my book. So if there's something wrong in there, it could be. But the thing is, it's up to, I mean, unfortunately, it's up to readers to double and triple check information that comes out and that they're reading before they take it in and say, oh yes, this is the way things are. We have a tendency, especially in this community, because we are decentralized, we have a tendency to sort of want to replicate what other religions have, what other spiritual traditions have. Specifically, those of us that came from Christianity, right? We don't have a pope, we don't have a pastor, we don't have someone coming in and saying, this is the way things are, and then giving us like the immutable truth, the immutable laws of the universe and how things work. We don't have that. We don't have a Bible. We don't have a sacred text. We don't have a single solitary text that tells all of us what to do at all times and is generally considered to be the book. So a lot of us tend to go latch on to books like mine, books like, Scott Cunningham, Silver Ravenwolf, Dorothy Morrison, Raymond Buckland. I mean, tons of authors. We tend to latch on to their books as though we can replace, have a singular sacred text and then supplant this new witchy text in the place of that. But we don't have something like that. And in a lot of ways, I'm so glad that we don't have that. We don't have a single document that we're all trying to perpetually defend and transform our ways of modern thinking to try to fit some text that is decades old or hundreds of years old or thousands of years old and try to say, oh, this is what they meant. Oh, this is how we can reinterpret that to make it. But no. We get the opportunity to learn and grow and have an organic spiritual existence. But to have an organic spiritual existence, to have a spiritual path that is grounded in good research doesn't just mean read your witchy books. It means vet your witchy books. It means vet that witchy podcast. It means vet that witchy YouTuber like me. Vet that information. And don't just vet it from within other pagan media. Don't just compare witchy book to witchy book. Compare it to outside. If you're reading a book about crystals, go pick up a book about, if you're reading a book about crystal magic, go pick up a book on geology, mineralogy. If you're reading a book about, plants, if you're reading a book about plant magic, go pick up a book on botany. Go pick up a book on chemistry. Go audit some courses, go learn online about the science or the why behind the what that doesn't just exist in magical spaces. It will help you. I promise it will help you ground your understanding and it will help you grow your spiritual worldview. I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you like this video. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on traditions generally speaking. Are there any traditions that you've created for yourself? Are there any traditions that you poked at and decided against. Is there anything that you have a love for that you know might have aged badly? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much. Bye now.